house we've had this semester. If you are currently without chairs, a few more chairs are here, you can grab one, and then maybe find a space you can actually see and enroll very convenient. My name is Todd Cleveland. That's Oliver Diniz. I'm the Executive Director of the Croft Institute. We have had a quick introduction to the series of visiting speakers, of which this is the very last installment this year. We've had a total of 5 regular visiting speakers this year, covering all of our regions, which is always our goal at each one. And of course, we have a new region this year in terms of one of the classes that's in Africa. And we were very fortunate that our colleague, Dr. Guthrie, had someone come to town. That's Dr. Todd Cleveland over there who will be speaking. And offered to basically give us a talk here, and we could fit that in. And so we have all the 5 regions covered this academic year, and hope to do that next year, of course, as well. As you know, we have this visiting speaker series every year. This year, in addition to the 5 speakers, academic speakers, we also had some of our own alumni, the Croft alumni, come and give presentations. And before, we had a panel. In the spring, we had Dr. Amy Mahoney speak here in a full visiting speaker presentation. If you have any ideas or topics, and especially speaking to the Croft students that you'd like to see covered, we're always welcome to receive suggestions. Now that we turn it over to the introducer of the evening, that's Dr. Zach Kagan-Guthrie, who's of course teaching the 211 Africa class of the Croft Institute this semester. I've seen many faces here from that class. And he will introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Todd Cleveland, and then we'll turn it over to our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Todd Cleveland. He earned his PhD in history from the University of Minnesota. His research focuses on interactions between Africans and Europeans under colonial rule, and particularly labor and social relations in the Portuguese Empire. He wrote a PhD on labor in Angola thanks to his ability to ride Russian cargo pilots and beginning a ride to northern Angola in 1 feet. From that dissertation, he produced 2 books. The first is Stones of Contention, the History of Africa's Diamonds. The second is Diamonds in the Rough, Corporate Paternalism and African Professionalism on the Lines of Colonial Angola, both of which were published with Ohio University Press. He also has 2 forthcoming books. The first is Following the Ball, the Migration of African Soccer Players Across the Portuguese Empire, on which this presentation is based, which will also be with Ohio. And Croft with Roger Granda, Companhia de Imagens de Angola, Fotos que Escondem Imagens que Mostram, from Gary Paz, the Portuguese publisher. Finally, because he is an academic Power Ranger, and 4 books is apparently not enough for him, and he makes some of the rest of us jealous, he's currently researching 2 more book-length projects, one on the history of tourism in Africa, which is also under contract with Ohio University Press, and one on the history of tourists from Rhodesia and apartheid South Africa to Mozambique. So please join me in welcoming Todd Cleveland.
Thank you for the very nice and warm introduction. Thank you all for coming out on a Monday night, no matter how much extra credit Dr. Guthrie might be offering. This is a fantastic crowd, especially at a football first school. So this is great to see this many folks out interested in soccer. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you for the Croft Institute, to the Croft Institute for hosting me today and creating the space in this time in this event for me to speak. So thanks to everyone who's had a hand in getting me here and offering me this opportunity. As Zach indicated, I'm going to be talking about soccer tonight, and this research is based on the book that will be out shortly, in the fall actually, and has entailed 6 or 7 or 8 years, somewhere in our worth of work, so I'm happy to finally see this reach fruition, have the book in hand, and move on to other things. I'm a soccer junkie, I'm a soccer fan, but I'm not a soccer historian. I'm just I feel like an imposter at times at these soccer conferences and things like that. I survive on the level of interest I have in my fandom, etc. But as a soccer scholar, I'm passing through, put it that way. But it's been something I very much have enjoyed doing. So thank you, and hopefully I'll take you through this what I find to be a very sort of interesting process of migration, social challenges, racial divides, etc. Over the course of roughly about 30 years from the 1940s until the 1970s. Okay, so when superstar soccer player Eusebio left the field following Portugal's 2-1 defeat to England in the 1966 World Cup semifinals, he was awash in tears, fiercely clutching his red and green jersey, the national colors of Portugal. Yet Eusebio was neither born nor grew up in Portugal. Instead of Mozambican, he was one of many African players who traveled to the metropole, to Portugal, from Africa to ply their athletic skills from roughly the late 1940s until the mid-1970s. Okay? So Portugal had 5 colonies in Africa until 1974, at which point a coup overthrew the dictator Salazar, which I'll talk about going forward. Like Eusebio, many of these African players performed spectacularly on the field, significantly elevating their play, the play of their respective club teams, and vaulting the Portuguese national team to unprecedented levels. Most notably, the 3rd place finish at the aforementioned 1966 World Cup. It's important to note that Portugal was particularly bad at soccer in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s, which was part of the impetus to start utilizing these very talented African players. They would regularly get drubbed 8-0, 9-0, 10-0 by footballing minnows at the time, so, of which Portugal was one. So here's this sort of iconic image of Eusebio in the center here being escorted off the field following the 2-1 loss to England. So while both Eusebio and Portuguese everywhere grieved following the squad's exit from the 1966 World Cup, the country was simultaneously engaged in far greater matters. Since the early 1960s, Portugal had been actively attempting to suppress armed insurgencies led by liberation movements in 3 of its African colonies, Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea. I'll have a map for you in a second. Unlike other European colonizing nations, Portugal's dictatorial regime, which was the Estado Novo, or New State in English, intransigently resisted international pressure to decolonize, locking itself in a struggle to retain its African possessions. And as promised, so Portugal, as you can see, is up on the Iberian Peninsula, just on the west coast of the Iberian Peninsula. And then the 2 major colonies I'm going to talk about tonight are Angola here and Mozambique on the east coast, southeast coast of Africa. Although they had 3 others, as I mentioned, Guinea-Bissau is on the west coast, the Cape Verde Islands just off the coast there, and then tiny South Tome and Principe just in the middle there. So Lisbon's insistence on the territorial and thus racial integration of Portugal and its African colonies was central to its public relations campaign intended to legitimize and thereby maintain the empire. Yet as the Cold War progressed, keep in mind this is all happening in the midst of the Cold War, the Estado Novo regime came under increasing pressure from the socialist bloc of nations, including the growing number of newly independent African states, left-leaning African states, I should say, regarding its imperial obstinacy and more specifically the racist and exploitative policies in place in its colonies. Even staunch allies such as the United States were privately imploring Portugal to relax statutory controls in the empire. This mounting pressure and intended international isolation prompted the Portuguese regime to waive a host of travel and labor restrictions in order to facilitate the employment and relocation of these African soccer players from the continent to Portugal. These integrated measures were intended to mollify the regime's international critics, as well as Portugal's increasingly discontented colonial subjects. So following these adjustments, Portugal could newly showcase a national soccer squad that allegedly evinced a genuinely multiracial nation, or at least racial tolerance and acceptance. So indeed, the inclusion of African players such as Eusebio and many others on Portugal's club and national soccer teams and their sustained continental and international success constituted valuable propaganda for the increasingly embattled new state, the Estado Novo regime, which it utilized to highlight the unity of the empire and the colonies in the metropole, the opportunities for social mobility that its African colonial subjects allegedly enjoyed, and the racial harmony that this integration purportedly fostered. And so, just quickly, take you back to that slide from the beginning. You can see here's the starting 11 in the 1966 World Cup, and there are 4 African players, actually all from Mozambique. So second in from the top left is Vicente Lucas, Hilario, Maria Coluna, and Eusebio. So 4 out of the starting 11 hail from Africa. These players' inclusion on Portugal's Portuguese squad, and more importantly, the remarkable footballing success that facilitated their selection in the first place, in fact, controverted European colonial tenets that Africans were inherently inferior. The local pride and confidence that these footballers generated, in turn, emboldened Africans in the colonies as indigenous residents began envisioning political independence. Intensified notions of self-sufficiency and capability, which these African soccer players exemplified, propelled this political process, eventually prompting the nationalist wars for independence in Portugal's African colonies. As I mentioned, these broke out in the early 1960s, 3 wars simultaneously, or 3 independence wars. So following the end of Portugal's imperial project in 1974 and into 1975, it took some time to actually formally decolonize. These inspirational athletes made more tangible contributions to the processes of nation building in the array of nascent Lusophone African countries, as coaches, directors of national soccer federations, and oftentimes politicians. So drawing upon oral and archival sources, this paper attempts to reconstruct the experiences and the durable impacts of these migrant African players as they relocated to Portugal from the 1940s, roughly 1949 until 1975, attempted to navigate and negotiate this politically charged environment, especially after the wars for independence started, and strove to consolidate their post-soccer futures. Keep in mind, this was at a time when players were not earning millions of dollars playing soccer. Through a reconstruction of this process, I argue that the labor reforms that enabled these players to seek employment in Portugal were politically motivated, intended primarily to appease external critics from Washington to Moscow, and were in practice highly restricted. While the Portuguese regime's effusive, self-congratulatory propaganda regarding these players was largely spurious. I also contend that despite the extraordinary nature of these individuals' lives, their experience suggests strong continuities with and affinities to popular African labor strategies, including seeking occupational advice from more senior employees, or in this case teammates, or fellow players, and engaging in secondary migration to improve their working and living conditions. Indeed, even as these athletes swapped countries to ply their trade, they drew upon local values, priorities, and strategies forged in the acutely demanding colonial settings from which they derived. And finally, I argue that the multifaceted process of cultural assimilation or integration that helped players adjust to their new surroundings, in fact, commenced often inconspicuously in Africa's urban and colonized spaces, and that's well before these players ever set foot in Portugal. However, their overt and really virtually unflinching apoliticism, which is a corollary, I argue, of their long-term social improvement objectives, suggests that they also actively and strategically sought to integrate socially, or at least to cultivate this perception. So ultimately, these players' experiences illuminate the cosmetic and limited nature of Portugal's labor and social reforms, even when applied to arguably the nation's highest profile of wage earners. But also some of the ways that Africans could creatively, if carefully, exploit opportunities generated by shifts in the social, political, economic landscapes in the waning decades of the Portuguese Empire. Okay, so how did we get here? As in other colonized settings, soccer was introduced by the sort of standard agents of colonialism, missionaries, colonial administrators, merchants, soldiers, settlers, etc. And although Africans throughout the empire embraced the game, its introduction was anything but innocent. The sport was intended to subdue, discipline, inculcate, and even demean local populations. Indeed, soccer was more than just a game. It was a device used to establish and deepen both physical and psychological control of the subjects in Portugal's empire. Although soccer in the colonies was for decades following its introduction, which we could trace back to sometime around the 1880s, 1890s perhaps, it was a racially segregated undertaking. Only in the 1940s do you start to see racially integrated squads. And from 1949, and then more earnestly in 1950, in the 1950s and into the 1960s, waves of Africans began to relocate to Portugal to play soccer. And so now the alleged benefits of colonialism were fully on display, quote-unquote benefits of colonialism. Yet the government-sanctioned relocation of African soccer players to Portugal during the late colonial period also suggests that mounting international pressure had significantly impacted the regime's regulatory ethos. Indeed, Portugal's hastily enacted policies intended to retain control of the empire were often schizophrenic in nature, and Portuguese colonial labor policy was absolutely no exception. Contradictions within this legislation significantly shaped the experiences of the growing numbers of talented African soccer players who hoped to capitalize on their athletic abilities. So on one hand, for example, these players were able to pursue these remunerative opportunities that would have previously been unimaginable due to the institutionalized racism in the colonies. This shifting attitude towards African labor was manifested in the initial signing of these players, and then later the high levels of responsibility that these individuals assumed for both their club and national teams. And in fact, many of these African-born players ended up captaining these squads well before the end of the Portuguese colonial era. One could argue a belated acknowledgement that nationality could be defined by culture rather than race. Let me just give you an image. Here's Mario Wilson, who's one of the first players to go from Mozambique, African players to relocate from the colonies to Portugal. And he goes in 1949. So this is a squad he's on in the 1940s in Lourenço Marques, which is the colonial name for the contemporary city of Maputo, the capital of Mozambique. So in spite of the fact that these players could proceed to the highest levels of the Portuguese soccer universe, this universe was, however, in practice, quite circumcised. For example, circumscribed. That's not the first time that's happened. I need a synonym there, obviously. For example, although metropolitan clubs and the Portuguese government coordinated their efforts to enable the former to sign and relocate these African players, these athletes were not permitted to seek employment beyond Portugal's borders. And perhaps no case illustrates this better than that of Eusebio, who, as a result of all of his on-the-field success, had attracted suitors from across Europe, only to discover that Salazar, the Portuguese dictator, had officially declared him a national treasure, and so thereby precluding any employment abroad. He was not happy with this designation, I'm sure. Even those players who weren't eyeing greener or more lucrative pastures beyond Portugal's borders were under constant surveillance by the regime's vaunted secret police force in an effort to ensure that these athletes didn't mix with any sort of revolutionary types. Indeed, in this tenuous environment, the regime moved aggressively to twin football and politics. As João Malheiro has argued elsewhere, quote, "The narrow link between football and politics cannot be dismissed. In colonial era Portugal, to make Eusebio, a black African, the grandest symbol of the country, served perfectly the perverse intentions of the government officials. The fondness dispensed to our athlete of the century had the intention of protecting the regime, of softening its racial intolerance, and of exhibiting to the world an artificial generosity. Eusebio was hypocritically exploited." End quote. And as Eusebio himself once remarked, quote, I never was political, and much less in that period. I was used by the regime, but only later did I realize that." End quote. The regime's scrutiny of these players was even more acute when they traveled behind the Iron Curtain to play against club or national teams located within the Soviet sphere of influence. So oftentimes they traveled to play a Bulgarian national team, for example, or one of the major club teams as part of a European-wide tournament. So as such, even if the intra-empire upward labor mobility that the Portuguese regime was touting featured a very high or arguably no ceiling, its walls, to continue with the metaphor, were bounded, surveilled, and in practice, strictly delimited. Even the social mobility that Eusebio and other players seemingly embodied is somewhat dubious upon closer examination. So though the regime relentlessly trumpeted these rags to riches stories or narratives in which forlorn Africans rose to the highest levels of Portuguese society via their soccer acumen, players such as Eusebio were the exception rather than the rule. Instead, many of these players were members of an extremely small, privileged minority in Portugal's colonies who had benefited from otherwise rare educational opportunities and were oftentimes the offspring of Portuguese fathers and black African mothers, and therefore enjoyed a special sort of intermediate legal and social status. As Hilario, who I pointed out earlier, a former player originally from Mozambique, explained to me during our interview, quote, "There were many players who lived quite well in Lourenço Marques, the capital of colonial Mozambique, and only came to Portugal because they wanted to play for a club that mattered and for the recognition," end quote. As such, many African players' migration to Portugal was more accurately constituted a form of geographical rather than social mobility, as they were moving from one privileged, advantaged environment to another. The commencement in Africa of the process of cultural assimilation for players also contributed to their often seamless transition from Africa to Portugal, because virtually all the African clubs for which these players were affiliated prior to being discovered featured Portuguese coaches, and were also all invariably located in urban areas, the loci of European colonization. Every one of these future migrants, regardless of their social backgrounds, spent time in acutely colonized spaces and were thus exposed to Portuguese customs and values prior to leaving the continent. This familiarity with Portuguese culture in turn helped these players transition upon reaching the metropole and ultimately to assimilate reasonably effortlessly. And just a couple slides here is a photograph, image of Eusebio's club team from where he played for Sporting, which is one of the major. This was a team affiliated with one of the major clubs in Lisbon. A team I don't like very much, so I don't want to belabor this. So here's Eusebio, the third over from the left, and then. Porto, one of the major Portuguese clubs. Again, you can see that these clubs are racially integrated even into as early as the mid-1950s. And I don't need to tell you, this is from the 1970s. So here's Benfica, one of the greatest teams in the world. Right. Again, you can see that there are many black African players. And these are photographs of their starting 11. Prior to a particular game. So they're playing significant roles in the success of these clubs. Let's see. The metropolitan clubs that facilitated these players' migration to Portugal also played a role in this typically smooth transition by reducing opportunities for conflict, confrontation, culturally based confusion, etc. So upon reaching Portugal, these players were typically whisked away to what were called team houses or players' houses, where they would reside while playing for these teams. So as Eusebio, who played for Benfica, a Lisbon-based outfit, explained to me during our interview, quote, "When I arrived in Portugal in 1960, Benfica already had a house called the Benfica House," not very creatively named. "If you played for Benfica and you were single, you went there. When I arrived at the airport, I went straight to the Benfica House," which is not exactly true, "and I had my own room there. And there was always someone who took care of the domestic work. We had television and other games, and it felt like our home. If we had a game on Sunday, we would all stay in the house, married players too, starting on Friday, so we would all be together. The close contact with all of your teammates created a sense of union. Everyone knew each other, talked to each other every day, went to practice together every day, went to the movies together, had dinner together, and then watched some television. At 11 p.m., someone would turn off the lights, and we would all go to bed." End quote. It's a fodder of a social historian. Although players predictably miss their relatives and other facets of their now distant homelands, the combination of their agreeable living arrangements, the paucity of any Africans residing in Portugal during this period, the fact that the vast majority of their teammates were of course Portuguese, and their undeniable appreciation of the material benefits that this new milieu offered them, and of course by extension their families, often engendered a genuine adoption of this new environment. In fact, many of these players married Portuguese women, and decades after their playing days ended, continued to reside in Portugal. If players adapted or assimilated culturally and integrated socially with few difficulties, they also adopted a series of familiar labor strategies to help with occupational adjustments and ultimately to capitalize to the fullest extent possible on these new remunerative opportunities. In some way, the superstar status of many of these players works to obscure the reliance on labor strategies that Africans in Portugal's colonies had been employing for decades, if not longer. For example, prior to leaving Africa, many soccer prospects sought occupational advice from players who had already migrated to Portugal, typically inquiring about what wages they should seek and which clubs offer the best working and, in this case, living conditions as well. And once established in the metropole, they're often seeking advice from more senior teammates when it comes time to renegotiate their contracts. Eusebio indicated during our interview that he even relied on more senior players for advice regarding how he should conduct himself when interacting with Salazar, the Portuguese dictator who prevented him from playing elsewhere in Europe. These players also engaged in well-worn labor migration strategies, retracing the footsteps of migrant laborers, or in this case again soccer players, who had preceded them in order to secure the best possible wages and conditions, reminiscent of Mozambicans seeking employment on the South African mines. And many players also engaged in secondary migration, and this will become extremely important, subsequently affiliating with a series of different clubs while in Portugal, just as mine workers might deliberately switch employers in an effort to improve their working conditions. Thus, even as these players navigated this drastically difficult terrain, they fell back on familiar tactics. Indigenous laborers throughout Portugal's African empire would find neither their fundamental occupational nor migratory strategies unfamiliar. And here's just a few images. So here's Eusebio and Mario Coluna, who was his kind of senior advisor. They were both from the same neighborhood in Mozambique. They both played for Benfica. Eusebio kind of acted as a father to him and took him shopping, bought him clothes, opened his bank account. I mean, he owed Coluna everything in a way. Here's an image of 3 players from Mozambique, Eusebio, Costa Pereira, and Mario Comune. Again, what's important here is that provenance was of great importance to these players, and it transcended the racial divide. So Costa Pereira, being a white Mozambican settler, coming from Mozambique to the metropole, to Portugal to play soccer, these players remained extremely close. And their activities, their actions, their sentiments, etc., again, transcended the racial divide that existed sort of very acutely in the colonies, much less so in Portugal, again, because there were so few African. There really wasn't a sizable African population in Portugal. That's not to say that racism didn't exist in Portugal, of course it did. But these types of relationships were much easier to maintain in Portugal than they may have been in the colonies. So it was much more important for example, Eusebio and Maria Coluna, that Costa Pereira was from Mozambique, not that he was white or black. Okay? So they would have sort of greater, the relationships were stronger with other Mozambicans, irrespective of their race, than they would be with a black African, for example, or a black Angolan, sorry, for example. And then again, here's an image of Eusebio and Hilario. Even though they're playing on opposite teams, they get together after the games. I mean, so this would be unthinkable. This would be like Arkansas and Ole Miss. Ole Miss, sorry, Ole Miss, and I'm from Arkansas, so this, Ole Miss and Mississippi State. I mean, you just don't do that. But these guys, it's important that they maintain these relationships. I'm only imagining what the relationship is like between Mississippi State. I know that we beat you guys in football last year. So in practice, the migration paths that African players traversed did not always simply culminate with them moving from club to club. Okay? Many parlayed their ability to relocate to Portugal to continue their academic studies or to secure long-term employment in the country, both of which were intended to safeguard these athletes' futures well beyond the end of their playing days. So this former endeavor was accomplished by playing for Académica de Coimbra, okay, which is a mid-sized city in central Portugal. The club linked with Portugal's premier university, whose squad during the colonial era was comprised solely of matriculating students. So while Coimbra really recruited in Africa, leaving this expensive endeavor to the major Portuguese clubs, the university team subsequently became a target for many African soccer players after they arrived in Portugal. So in order to reach Coimbra, players requested loans or transfers. These are very common practices in soccer, to Académica or to Coimbra, in the hopes of earning a degree that would in turn serve them well long after their athleticism faded. Again, the salaries are relatively minimal at this point. Although the major clubs such as Benfica or Sporting, who lost players to Coimbra in this manner, understandably disdained this practice, the Portuguese regime deemed the enrollment of Africans at its best university as valuable propaganda material, and thus sanctioned these players' strategic requests. One of the first African players who prioritized education in this manner was Mario Wilson, I slide up with him a little while ago, who initially signed with Sporting, a major Lisbon-based outfit, in 1949, but who by 1951 had already transferred to Académica. According to Wilson, quote, "Sporting didn't want me leaving the club, but after the government created the law, I was able to leave Sporting to go to Coimbra. With just soccer, you could live well for 5 or 6 years and then fall off the map. It was a huge risk. Therefore, many players would choose Académica so they could achieve more in their life," end quote. Although Coimbra offered lower wages, they actually paid out subsidies rather than salaries. Many other African players, conditioned by their exacting existences in the colonies, saw education as an ideal long-term solution, and thus followed in Wilson's footsteps. I'll get to this next. One of these players was Augusto Araújo, who first arrived in Portugal in 1956 to play for Benfica, but eventually made his way to Académica, explaining in a 1960 interview that, quote, "Benfica is a great club, and I am its player, but I have determined that Académica offers me more possibilities. My ambition has always been to become an engineer. I came to Lisbon with this intention, ready to fight for it, and I haven't relented. I know that through this achievement, I will give my parents and my brother great happiness," end quote. Happily for Araújo and apparently his family as well. This was a goal that he was ultimately able to achieve. And just a couple images of some of the players around town in Coimbra. So there's Araújo actually standing up front. Mario Wilson, sorry, in the back here. And actually Daniel Chapenda's an interesting case. He's from Angola, and he's one of the very few African players who goes back to the colonies to fight for independence, who flees Portugal during this period. Unlike something like to talk about later, there were many, many French players from Africa who traveled to France to play and then fled to fight for, not so much to fight for, but to campaign for Algerian independence. And so these Portuguese players are sort of, in stark contrast, decidedly apolitical when we think about the Francophone African players who went back and very openly and actively advocated for African independence. So meanwhile, other African players sought long-term security at Croft, which is the Companhia União Fabril, which is an industrial conglomerate based outside of Lisbon. Croft required the players on the team it sponsored to be company employees and also guaranteed them jobs following their playing days. So testimony from Manuel de Oliveira, who both played for and later coached Croft, explains the appeal of the club/company. Quote, "In 1957, I had to find a new team because at that time the football salaries were small. So I ended up at Croft, which at the time employed around 10,000 people. I played until 1962 and I was the captain. As coach at Croft, sometimes players would come and stay for a month and try out. And if I gave the okay, they would stay and play and also work for Croft. If not, Croft would give them a job or send them to other teams. Players liked coming to Croft because the job they received and the opportunity to play soccer, was a good combination," end quote. Here's an image of Coimbra side with some of the African players prior to a match against Porto in 1961. And here's the reason I show this is because this was sort of a common practice, was to combine formal employment beyond soccer with the ability to play soccer. And this is one of the more famous teams in Lourenço Marques, Ferroviário. This is a team associated with the railroad. So again, you were employed by the railroad and you played soccer. You were almost like a ringer in a way. They gave you a job and you were there to perform for the soccer team, but you did have a formal salary, etc. Although neither Coimbra nor Croft were particularly competitive on the field, the secondary migration strategies that these players employed in order to secure academic and employment opportunities in many cases represented foresighted thinking that sacrificed potential short-term athletic glory in exchange for long-term security. Just as these players strategically exploited the range of educational and remunerative opportunities in Portugal, they also deftly navigated the politically charged environments in both the metropole and the colonies that the wars for independence were fueling. Indeed, these athletes were viewed neither as subversives by the Portuguese population, nor as political stooges or collaborators by their African brothers, who were fighting and literally dying for independence, even though many of these players donned both Portuguese national team jerseys and Portuguese military uniforms. Although often internally conflicted, these athletes' professionalism and determination to improve their lives, and of course the lives of their families, underpinned their conspicuous apoliticism throughout this period. As Eusebio once famously declared, quote, "I am a professional who seeks nothing more than to work. Soccer is my politics," end quote. As such, despite these players' allure as potential nationalist symbols for both the Portuguese regime and the various African liberation movements, they failed to serve either the insurgencies or the counterinsurgency well, while remaining widely respected and admired in both the metropole and the colonies. And here's just a couple images. So here's Eusebio returning home to Lisbon, where there was a gigantic celebration for the team following their semifinal loss in the 1966 World Cup. I don't know why he's in the World Cup was held in England that year, which is why he has a bobby hat, why he decided to dominate the entire trip. And this is a parade down one of Lisbon's main streets the following day, honoring the squad that exited. I mean, can you imagine this? They lost the semifinal games and the whole city shuts down. That gives you an idea of how bad Portuguese soccer was before. Okay, so on April 25th, 1974, a group of mid-level Portuguese army officers, disaffected after waging the counterinsurgency campaigns I talked about before in the African colonies for over a decade, turned against their superiors, prompting a popular uprising that swept the durable Estado Novo regime from power and ultimately ended the wars in the colonies. The so-called Carnation Revolution radically altered the political landscape in Portugal and would shortly deliver independence to the colonies. What the revolt observed to the African footballers playing in the metropole at the time, however, was much less clear. Many African players continued with their careers in Portugal, while other footballers, such as Eusebio, took the opportunity to finally move abroad, signing with a series of clubs, many of which are actually located in North America, so Canada, US, and Mexico, before he finally retired in 1979. Regardless of where they played, once retired, many of these ex-footballers turned to coaching. And although some players remained in Portugal to pursue these coaching careers, many others extended their professional engagement with the game by answering the call to return to Africa to help their fledgling countries develop. With soccer a key tool used to foster unity in these new nations, so keep in mind these nations are just coming online in 1975. And these players feel indebted, they feel a sense of patriotism, so many of them do return. For example, responding to the summons of Mozambique's first president, Samora Machel, Mario Coluna would go on to oversee the country's national team and eventually assume the presidency of Mozambican Football Federation. Writing years later, Mozambique's second president, Joaquim Chissano, indicated the former Benfica's, lauded the former Benfica star's commitment to the nation, declaring, quote, Mario Coluna is a true nationalist and patriot who never forgot his country. Because of that, his footballing career brought him back home, end quote. And just quickly, there's an image of Coluna when he was playing for the Portuguese national team. Just over 3 years ago, Eusebio passed away at the age of 71. Almost immediately, the statue of Eusebio, erected outside Benfica's Estadio de Luz in 1992, became an impromptu shrine to the fallen player and a powerful testament to his enduring impact and legacy. So this is outside Benfica Stadium, just after his death. You can see the sort of outpouring of emotion manifested in scarves and other items of Benfica paraphernalia. Following official periods of mourning in both Portugal and his native Mozambique, Eusebio was laid to rest in Portugal's national pantheon, where only the most significant Portuguese are buried. Highlighting the unifying contributions that Eusebio made to both nations, former Mozambican President Chissano eulogized, quote, Portuguese football has lost one of its greatest idols. Football brought Mozambique and Portugal together, and everyone in Mozambique is proud of Eusebio, end quote. Everyone in Mozambique indeed, and Portugal, and I would argue beyond. Okay, to conclude. By shifting the focus away from the exploitative colonial or neo-colonial state or predatory soccer clubs, recurrent themes in African soccer scholarship, to the players themselves, my research aims to dispel notions of these athletes as victims, and instead considers them as individuals strategically offering their labor to those employers that provide the best possible conditions in which to earn a living. As Eusebio's mother candidly proclaimed after being asked why her son chose Benfica over other clubs, quote, Benfica gave big money. Thus, studies that sound the alarm regarding the exodus of African footballers risk ignoring these migrants' aspirations to improve their lives and, by extension, those of their family members, just as millions of Africans did throughout the colonial era and continue to do so today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cleveland agreed to answer a few questions. We're probably about 20 minutes or so. I'll try to manage those. Probably has one and a half to start but with that.
Do you think they chose to be apolitical to both provide more for their family and because it kept them at the top of the sphere in both Mozambique and Portugal? And why do you think the French players were so determined to go back to Algeria? Because the scene was different?
Do you want me to, should I answer now or take a few minutes? Okay. Yeah, very good question. I mean, even talking to these players now about why they weren't actively involved in fighting for Mozambique's independence or Angolan independence, they're somewhat, I wouldn't say they're ashamed about their lack of activism, but some of them do regret not getting more involved, at least formally. They often cite the conditions. They were operating in an environment in which there was a dictator. So they indicated that it was much more difficult for them to engage politically. Obviously, the political environment in France allowed for more discussion, dissension, etc. At the time. So many of them, I think, regret that decision. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the reasons for their behavior, the ways that their decisions at the time were such that they wanted to safeguard their careers, help their families as best as possible. Many of them did come from very difficult situations, though, as I explained, not all of them, certainly. But they were enjoying what they were doing. It was almost easier to be apolitical in that environment than to engage in any sort of risky behavior. And the secret police in Portugal were, although people will laugh about them now, At the time, they were sort of a very intimidating force in the country. And these players were under very close scrutiny in a way that the Francophone players weren't. So if they went abroad, for example, they told funny stories about the PED agents. PED is the secret police in Portugal, who would accompany them and pretend that they were journalists. And in fact, I mean, they would sit in hotel lobbies with newspapers like this. I mean, something out of a movie, checking the guys out. And of course, they knew that these guys were secret agents with the state. But the point is that regardless of how complicated the situation might have been, it was very difficult for them to engage in any sort of revolutionary politics. If they encountered, especially when they went behind the Iron Curtain, if they encountered Africans who were studying in some of the Eastern European countries, they could have very public interactions with them, but only for a very short time. They might be able to give them tickets to the game or something like that, but their every move was being observed.
Can you give an example of somebody that did return and engage in the fight for decolonization? What did you expect would happen to players that actually did engage in that?
Okay, so good question. In this case, there are only 4 players who actually go back. Two Mozambicans and 2 Angolans. Chupenda goes on to become a decorated military commander for the MPLA, which is one of the forces fighting for independence in Angola, and then subsequently fighting other Angolans for control of the country. I can't remember exactly when he died, but he made major contributions to the struggle. One of the Mozambican players went on to become a politician, and the other 2 sort of just made their history. So they had sort of different plights. There was no sort of one sort of uniform thing that happened to them. Interestingly, in contrast in the Francophone case, they ended up leaving in mass right before the '56 World Cup in Sweden, which caused the French team considerable difficulties, and ended up touring the globe as this sort of soccer team generating awareness and, to a certain extent, funding for Algerian independence. And many of them, after Algeria finally gained independence, were permitted back into France to play. And they were sort of vilified in Algeria, ironically, because Algeria, the initial government, the new government in Algeria, was extremely left-leaning, and they viewed these individuals as capitalists. And didn't really want them in Algeria earning money playing soccer. So they have a really interesting sort of story. In contrast to the handful of Lusophone Africans who went back to fight. And really there's been no work done on these Lusophone Africans. So Chupenda still, there's no biography as far as I know. He's a major figure in the struggle for independence and subsequent conflict, civil conflict. Thank you.
Okay, so you mentioned that the players in Portugal weren't considered political stooges or anything. What was the narrative that Mozambicans created to allow for that? If they were apolitical at the time, how did local Mozambicans create a narrative viewing that?
Sure, I think that it's a really good question. All the players indicated that they weren't contacted by any of the independence movements. So in Mozambique, Frelimo was not reaching out to these players. And so there was the general public wouldn't have known that, but the players, even the players who wanted to perhaps become more engaged and involved, weren't receiving overtures from the nationalist movement. These players were so much more important to Black Mozambicans, for example, because of their on-the-field success. And so they weren't, of all the people who could get involved in the independence struggle in Mozambique, these players were kind of given a pass in a way. I mean, they were sort of empowering Africans in a different way in their success, and the fact that they were besting Portuguese on the field, I mean, that these were some of the best players, was much more important to the general population than to have 3 or 4 more hands, with AK-47s. I mean, what they were doing on the pitch was so much more important to them. And so they were considered heroes, ironically, by both the Portuguese and Black Mozambicans, Angola, etc. And these guys were so revered, not just them, of course, but some of the Portuguese players too. And all the Africans, we were talking about this earlier today, in an effort to kind of ascend or legitimize their status within Portuguese colonial society, started adopting Portuguese clubs. And so when there was a game on, let's say Benfica versus Sporting, a major game in Portugal, the sides and the nationalist movements and the Portuguese army would stop fighting so that they could both listen to the game for a couple hours, and then they would resume hostilities afterwards. So these players were respected, but, you know, on both sides of the battlefield, if you will. Sorry, there's a question. Sorry.
I was being featured in.
Oh, sure. Todd, T-O-D-D, and then Cleveland is like the city.
Okay, thank you.
That was the easiest question I've ever had. Thank you for that softball. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the talk. Eusebio's father was a white Portuguese.
Yes.
And he became a Portuguese citizen. He had dual citizenship. So isn't your characterization of him as an African pro? Secondly, being from that kind of background, is there any possibility that there was also a non-materialistic reason for him playing Portugal?
Sure, yeah. To answer your first question, I mean, I think it's possible to, it's a tricky one, obviously. I mean, I think Eusebio considered himself African, so it's not my label. I'm not ascribing that label to him. That's how he identified. Later, you're right, he was granted Portuguese citizenry, but he also maintained his Portuguese citizenry as well. Second question, I think one of the things that sort of scholars have overlooked is the fact that whether, in terms of this conversation regarding materialist pursuits within sporting endeavors, I mean, a lot of times somebody like Eusebio wanted to play against the best competition in the world. And so I don't think Eusebio was personally driven by material gain, although he certainly made a tremendous amount of money over the course of his career. Even initially, he was one of the highest paid players in Portugal. But I also think that the drive for competition, the love of the game, I mean, inspired these individuals as well. And as I indicated, some of them came from reasonably well-off households in Mozambique. So it's not as if this was a route out of poverty for many of these players. I mean, they were already engaged in studies. I mean, which was not necessarily common for most Black Mozambicans, especially at beyond elementary school or primary education. And so for them, I mean, there were other motivations certainly beyond sort of material gains, and there certainly wasn't a lot of money to be made. In fact, many of the players' parents were very skeptical about them getting involved in soccer as a career, because they're simply, and to a certain extent, these guys were trailblazers, so there was no precedent. The money on offer was not very considerable, and they saw the route to success through education, and that was much more important to the parents. So they often talked about these very difficult conversations they had with their parents. And the one sort of funny aspect of those conversations was that parents wouldn't let their kids play for teams that they didn't like. So if the father was a Benfica fan and Sporting was offering money, that was a non-starter. I mean, that wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't until either a team that, like Benfica, for example, or if no team, other team that caliber came calling, then they would encourage them to sign with some sort of less hostile, a team that they were largely indifferent towards.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Good. I kind of wanted to get a little more about the complexity of the kind of race dynamics here. I thought of two very short questions that may illuminate that. One is, was Eusebio ever the captain of the team? And was there any reaction to that on becoming the team? Okay, interesting. The other one, did he in particular, maybe others look at Brazil as an interesting comparison case, because of course it was the age of Pelé,
Exactly.
and the racial composition of that team was quite similar to the big Brazilian team of the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, Eusebio definitely captained the squads. Not necessarily while Coluna was there, because he was more senior and seen as an individual that was better equipped to captain a team, but Eusebio definitely captained teams over time.
National team included?
Eusebio captained nationally, I believe so.
That's really what I meant, sorry.
Yeah. But I mean, Coluna did as well. I mean, so, I mean, all these players. So what I didn't explain was that although I alluded to it, if you were mixed race in the Portuguese colonial setting, your official legal status was, you were a mestizo, which is kind of like roughly equivalent to mulatto, how we would think of that. But they had an actual legal status, which afforded them certain privileges that Black Mozambicans didn't have. And so, but they were still far, I mean, they were still oppressed vis-a-vis, white colonial settlers. And so they filled this sort of intermediate role. So they experienced racism, they experienced oppression, but they had more opportunities and privileges than did Black Mozambicans or Black Angolans. And so these individuals also experienced hardship, and this was not an easy ascension for them either. But a lot of these individuals did end up sort of captaining the squads. The other question was about Brazil. Brazil, thank you. Sorry. Yes, they were very engaged with Brazil. So oftentimes they would name their local neighborhood, the sort of neighborhood teams they would create after some of the more famous Brazilian squads. And they were acutely aware of what Pele was doing. Of course, so keep in mind this is all Portuguese. This is the sort of Portuguese-speaking world, and so they were very curious to what was going on in Brazil regarding any sort of regarding that having a racial dimension. I don't think so. I don't know that these players were necessarily concerned with the racial composition of the Brazilian squads at this time, other than to look at players like Pele and say, look at how he's succeeding. He's the best player in the world, or one of the best players in the world. So this whole what we've been fed regarding Black inferiority, culturally, socially, etc., is clearly inaccurate. So he was inspirational in that sense, and as were the other sort of Black Brazilian players who were playing at the very highest levels. But most of the conversations about Brazil came up with these players when they were kids, and they would sort of just try to mimic their favorite teams and favorite players.
So since the citizens of the colonial countries were big fans of the Portuguese sporting team, both like all of the players, what kind of, did that cause some conflict with the nationalist movements that recently that would cause opposition to the nationalist movement?
Yes, it could. I mean, you would think intuitively yes, but absolutely not. Every single one of these African nationalist leaders has a favorite Portuguese team. And it's almost certainly Benfica, Sporting, or Porto, or maybe Belenenses at the time. So Portuguese, so that there was a way that they could sort of compartmentalize Portuguese soccer and sort of disassociate that with Portuguese colonialism. And that continues to this day. If you go to Mozambique or Angola, every single citizen will have a favorite Portuguese soccer club. And they will watch that Portuguese soccer club over watching domestic soccer. So that's been a long-standing tradition that predated decolonization and persists. So no, I mean, you would think, but again, this was an aspect of Portuguese culture rather that they were willing to embrace, irrespective of its association with the regime. And as we saw, Salazar, the dictator, very much was trying to co-opt these players and make Portugal part of make soccer part of the sort of official, one of the three official pillars of the regime, the other two being Portuguese culture, which is represented by Fado, which is this wonderful music that, it's an acquired taste. And also the Catholic Church, which is Fatima. So so Salazar promoted this idea of the three F's, which was Fatima, which is essentially Catholicism, Fado, which is shorthand for Portuguese culture in a way, more broadly speaking, and then football. So this has been a very sort of politicized endeavor, but yet somehow the national leaders could reconcile liking Portuguese, loving Portuguese soccer with wanting political independence.
Go ahead.
Racism is a really big problem in European soccer among fans now. Did any of your interviews talk about experiencing racism with fans inside Portugal or out?
Yes, in two ways. One, when they started dating Portuguese women, obviously the women were comfortable with their relationship, but oftentimes sort of a distant family member wouldn't be. And so they were willing to root for them on Saturdays or Sundays, watching them play, rooting on the team, but it was just too close to home to have their nieces or, it wasn't so much the fathers actually, it was always ended up being this sort of like, boorish, uncle or something like that who was intolerant. The other ways that they experienced it were, it's mostly when they were dating women. To a certain extent, Africans suffered as a result of a policy known as stacking, in which players, according to race, are placed in certain positions on the pitch. And we saw that in American football, for example. So when I was growing up, there perception that white players were good at particular positions and black players were good at particular positions. The Portuguese were much more progressive in that respect than were the French, for example. So you have examples of Portuguese defenders, central defenders, which was very rare in other contexts. Although there are no black goaltenders. Again, that's in very few black central midfielders. That was thought to be the sort of quarterback on the field, and that person needed to be white for racist or racialist reasons. So to a certain extent, they experienced that. There were so few Africans in Portugal at the time that they were largely novelties. I mean, a lot of times they would talk about little kids just wanting to come up and touch them. So whether there are, racialist undertones to that or underpinnings, that's arguable certainly. But they didn't experience that. They were more like celebrities in many respects in Portugal. But they did feel it occasionally.
So how did the sports media in Europe, I guess more broadly the world, look at the '66 World Cup team? Did they view it as a good thing, Portugal is integrating their teams? Or did they kind of see it as they're exploiting their colony, they're gaining unfair advantage?
That's a great question.
People?
Mostly the latter.
Okay.
So when Portugal wasn't beating anybody, it was fine. But when Portugal started winning games using African players, then it became problematic. And the Italians were probably the worst. Anytime they would have sort of racist cartoons in the newspapers and things like that, depicting black African players as baboons or monkeys or whatever, that they weren't really Portuguese, they weren't European, they weren't white, and this was unfair that they were utilizing these players. So they would say like, AC Milan was defeated by Africa and Western or Southern Europe. I mean, they turned it into they were very unhappy with the utilization of African players. In the World Cup, the British press was not critical of the utilization of these African players. In fact, I think there were no African players playing in England at the time. So again, they were more like novelties, and they were just sort of fans of the game, and they wanted to see Eusebio play. So you didn't see any of that in Portugal. Although the Portuguese national team was the victim of some very creative scheduling by the British, and really kind of screwed over the sport. They made them travel the night before that last game. They switched the location of the last game to accommodate the Brits, and they made Portugal move. And Eusebio still talked about that when I interviewed him. I mean, he was still bitter about that. Saying we would have won if they had just let us stay where we were playing.
So I wanted the Italians to complain about that they imported scores of African players and made them Italians before that.
And the Portuguese press would push back on that. Exactly that.
There's probably time for one or two more questions. Anybody who might come up earlier? Way in the back.
Sir, to this day, do the Portuguese team still recruit from Angola, Mozambique, and the other colonies? And how does that play out for them in the modern era?
Yeah, good question. So if you follow soccer at all, you can, if your third cousin happens to be from a country, you can declare, you can play for that particular squad. So like France, the Portuguese national team has a lot of players of African descent. Sometimes that means that those players have a parent who was born there. They all live in Portugal now. So their relationship to Angola or Mozambique, for example, might be rather distant. But if you watched the Euro Cup last summer, you would have seen that Portugal has a lot of black players of black African descent. And so they're still actively utilized. And most of the players who go from, most of the club players who travel from Africa to play in Portugal are from the former colonies, and there's good reasons for that. There's the language, they can relocate to Portugal and already speaking Portuguese, they're familiar with customs, cuisine, all these sorts of things. So it's logical. But a lot of these networks have remained in place. Unfortunately, Mozambique doesn't produce good football players anymore. And if you talk to Mozambicans, they have all sorts of theories as to why that is. But nonetheless, Angolans are still producing reasonably decent players. So yes, there's still that connection. There's still that soccer connection between the former colonies and Portugal.
That's a really good end point. Before I thank Todd Cleveland, I'd like to request that the Croft students stay for a few extra minutes here when everybody else leaves to make sure that everybody signed up on this list up here. And now, finally, thank you.
Thank you.